Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Celine Heinbecker, and I'm the Director for Climate Finance Partnerships at Global Affairs Canada. I will be emceeing today's event, and I'm going to start off by passing the mic to Myriam Montra for introductions.
Thank you very much, Céline. I am Myriam Montra, and I am the Director General of the Inclusive Growth Governance of Innovation Bureau. So hello to everybody and welcome to this webinar for the Partnership Initiative of Indigenous Populations. Just want to let you know that the webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the YouTube channel of a Global Affairs Canada. I would like to begin to let you know that I'm talking from Ottawa on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I recognize that we work in different places and that you may therefore be joining webinar from a different traditional and indigenous territory. I encourage you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge this connection that you have with the people and the territory where you are right now. We are very excited that the call has been launched. It's been a long time in the making. We know that Indigenous leadership and knowledge are essential to addressing climate change, and this initiative is based on this belief.
This call aligns with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and supports Global Affairs Canada efforts on reconciliation. Global Affairs Canada and representatives from the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit Circumpolar Council of Canada, was representing the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, ITK, and the Métis National Council formed a working group to center Indigenous priorities and perspectives in the development of this call. We are very grateful for the engagement of the working group members in these initiatives. It would not have been possible without them. We value their time, expertise, and generosity in sharing their perspectives and guidance. Developing this call has been an opportunity for Global Affairs Canada to build new relationships with and learn from Indigenous peoples. This has fostered innovation in how we work to enable more inclusive programming by our department. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having that relationship and really including Indigenous perspectives in the work that we've been doing to date. As such, we hope the webinar is informative and useful for you as you prepare your concept notes. We are looking forward to seeing your ideas. I will now turn things over to Celine Heinbecker, as she's acting as our master of ceremony today. Over to you, Celine.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I have some announces, quick housekeeping items before I start. But first, I wanted to say that it is wonderful to see so many organizations participating to this webinar. We are quite happy to welcome you today. If you agree to be contacted by the participants of the webinar who would be interested to explore the possibility of a partnership in the framework of this call, would you please include your name, your address, your email address, the name of the organization, and the territory where you are located within the chat. And I see that somebody has already started doing so. The staff of the ministry will also be present in the chat. In order to avoid background noise, we have muted all the microphones. However, you can always include questions in the chat. There will be simultaneous interpretation during the video, and my coworker is telling me that it's working quite well, which pleases me. And the presenters will try to speak slowly in order to help the interpreters. If you have some technical issues, please let us know in the chat and somebody will contact you. The main objective for the webinar today is to share information of how to present concept notes for the initiative on the indigenous people partnering for climate. The agenda today is split in 3 sections. First, an hour of presentations from Global Affairs Canada and the working group. We will talk about the core parameters, hear from specialists in environment, gender, human rights, and result-based management, and look at practical aspects to submit the application package. We will have a short break, and then we will have an hour for questions and answers. We will start by answering questions we received by email. After that, the floor will be open for your questions today. In case we are not able to answer your question today, because we have to consult others to ensure we are providing the best possible response, we will post the answers on our website as soon as we can. And finally, the third item in our agenda, we have scheduled time for networking for applicants who might want to seek partnership opportunities with others in the webinar today.
There will be a survey in the chat. If you are interested in participating in the networking session at the end of the webinar, please let us know what region you're interested in for your programming. This will help us organize the breakout rooms for that portion of the agenda. You will be able to select the breakout room of your choice on the bottom of the screen when we get to that portion of the agenda. And you will be able to exit simply by clicking on X. We will go over this again later. Now I'm going to turn to provide a bit of background on the Partnering for Climate initiative and our climate finance, generally speaking. In 2021, Canada doubled its previous climate commitment from $2.65 billion to $5.3 billion and committed to leverage the climate action expertise of organizations in Canada and to advance feminist climate action that supports the poorest and most vulnerable. 315 million of that 5.3 billion was allocated to an initiative that we call Partnering for Climate. The initiative will fund projects from civil society, Indigenous peoples, and other organizations in Canada that will support climate change adaptation in sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world. Of that 315 million, 15 million has been earmarked to fund projects that support climate action priorities of Indigenous peoples in any countries eligible for official development assistance. Today's webinar is about that $15 million envelope. To support all of this work, Global Affairs Canada is helping to set up a community of practice to help organizations share knowledge and experience on nature-based solutions and biodiversity. You are warmly invited to join this community of practice, which is just starting. For more information, please write to the email address that we will share in the chat shortly. There are several eligibility criteria for Partnering for Climate to ensure alignment with Canada's International Climate Finance Program. We will describe these criteria throughout the presentations.
Now, I would like to take a few minutes to speak about Indigenous people partnering for climate. Representative from the Assembly of First Nations of the Inuit Circumpolar Canada Council Canada, reporting to Inuit Tapirik Kanatami, and the Métis National Council have been instrumental in designing our approach to programming the $15 million for Indigenous initiatives. These representatives will also be involved in the assessment of the concept notes and full proposal. Our approach aims to create spaces to work with new Indigenous partners and center Indigenous self-determination and leadership. For some organizations who have not yet worked with us and with our ministry, it might be necessary to build capacity through collaboration with other partners. Indigenous decision making must be prioritized in a project governance structure. This initiative is a response to the advice of the representative of the national indigenous organizations to have a dedicated envelope to support indigenous people working together on their climate priorities. We are seeking to program the $15 million for indigenous initiatives through a two-step call process. Step 1 is this call for concept notes, which is open until February 2023. Step 2, we will invite organizations that are screened during the step 1 to submit full proposals. We anticipate that the full proposals will need to be submitted by July 2023. After reviewing the full proposal, we aim to select one to three organizations and put funding agreements in place by the end of 2023.
You will have seen that Indigenous Peoples Partnering for Climate will have two types of projects: overarching projects and partnership projects. We will take a couple of minutes to make sure that the distinctions are clear. Overarching projects in the blue circle on the screen must be led by Indigenous organizations in Canada or non Indigenous organizations in Canada with strong connections with Indigenous peoples in Canada, or partnerships between the two kinds of organization. Overarching projects must include several components: project management, governance, reporting, capacity building, monitoring, evaluation, research and learning, and subgranting. Concept notes and subsequently full proposals must describe how the overarching project is designed to manage all of these components. Global Affairs Canada will have funding agreements with the organizations implementing the overarching projects. In contrast, Global Affairs will not have funding agreements directly with the organizations that will eventually later implement what we're calling partnership projects. This is because the partnership projects will be selected and funded by the organizations implementing the overarching projects. Overarching projects must dedicate at least 65% of the funding they receive under this call to partnership projects through subgranting. Partnership projects will be designed and implemented by Indigenous organizations in Canada and in developing countries who are working in partnership together. Given that this work is part of Partnering for Climate, there are mandatory eligibility criteria that we will discuss, including on outcomes, as well as alignment with climate finance objectives around climate adaptation and gender. The specialists will speak to these. In addition, overarching projects must align with 2 out of 5 climate finance policy objectives. We expect overarching projects will likely align with at least the following 2 objectives. One is advance feminist climate action that supports the poorest and most vulnerable. And 2 is leverage Canada's own expertise and innovative solutions on climate change to better address the needs of developing countries. The intent of this initiative is to support and make space for Indigenous organizations as implementers and decision makers.
In terms of organizational eligibility, your organization must either be an Indigenous organization in Canada. Indigenous organization in Canada will need to provide supporting documentation regarding their history, governance structure, and or ownership. Or your organization is in Canada and is non-Indigenous and has strong connections with Indigenous organizations in Canada and experience working with First Nation, Inuit, and or Métis. Strong connection may refer to close relationships, common interests, partnerships, and or collaborative work. Note that letters of support from Indigenous people in ODA eligible countries can be submitted in addition to the mandatory letters of support from Indigenous organization in Canada or First Nation in Canada, Inuit or Métis. Non-Indigenous organizations must provide letters of support that demonstrate those strong connections. This will be described later in the preparing to submit section during the webinar. Our working group colleagues from the Assembly of First Nations have created a short video outlining the guiding parameters to follow in the creation of your concept notes. I will now share this video with you.
Anin Bojo, Grammar Dedishnakas, Ottawa, Nonjaba, Makoto, Demonishnabe, and Dao. It's an honor to join all of you in this virtual circle from unceded and surrounded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands, what's currently known as Vancouver. I'm a member of the Assembly of First Nations team and one of the participants in the kind of broad steering committee of this Global Affairs Canada's project, Indigenous Peoples Partnering for Climate. Really honored to have the space to speak to some of the specific guiding parameters that the selection committee had identified for Indigenous peoples and the consideration of Indigenous peoples. And so if you bear with me, I'll share a little bit of background in the discussion and look forward to any comments or questions that any of you have. The first that I wanted to speak to was the importance of Indigenous self-determination. And our intention in articulating Indigenous self-determination as a principle is really upholding the specific priorities, governance, and knowledge systems of Indigenous peoples, and looking for organizations that seek to partner with Indigenous-led organizations that amplify the self-determination of their members. And really this means that we should be prioritizing Indigenous leadership, capacity, partnership building, and co-learning. You know, our intention in framing out this partnership between Indigenous peoples across the globe was really to amplify the way in which Indigenous peoples build solidarity amongst one another and how allied organizations can help support that. And key to that is making sure that the objectives and principles of our work together really supports Indigenous leadership and Indigenous-led work, and we frame that through the articulation of Indigenous self-determination. Indigenous self-determination being one of the minimum standards contained within the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The second guiding parameter focuses on amplifying Indigenous climate leadership. And really, you know, this is intended to support the shift that we've seen within Canada away from the victimization of Indigenous peoples towards the amplification of Indigenous-led solutions that are based in their governance, their rights, and their knowledge systems. And really, you know, our intention is that organizations recognize and support these locally driven climate priorities and perspectives. And really, you know, part of that is recognizing that climate change is one component of the legacy of root causes, such as the ongoing structural legacy of colonization. And really, when we should be articulating what our climate solutions would, we should be framing that through, you know, climate as a lens, climate change not exclusively as the reduction of greenhouse gases, but really from our elders' perspective, how do we acknowledge that the root cause is an environment or a living system that is out of balance, and that out of balance is driven by human actions and behaviors. To the extent that we can link those priorities to the priorities of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and amplify that climate leadership together is a key element of our work. And then finally, we wanted to frame Indigenous perspectives on climate adaptation. And really, adaptation in this context embodies a broader understanding of what adaptation can be. What are the structural determinants? How does adaptation interplay with all of these other socioeconomic factors that are unfortunately amplified by these structural legacies and their ongoing manifestations? And really, how do we, through the work that we're trying to do with this Indigenous Peoples Partnering for Climate, widen our scope to what we consider as adaptation? Adaptation to us, to Indigenous peoples, is about language revitalization, is about cultural revitalization, it's about getting back on the land, all of which are key to building our adaptive capacity, while noting we also need to consider how the history of uh, Indigenous peoples and their experience with colonization influences their sensitivity and their exposure to, either slow onset or long onset events, extreme weather, et cetera. And so all of that needs to be considered. And we're hopeful that, our perspectives and knowledge systems on the environment, on climate change, and on adaptation can play important roles in, articulating the broad program and design of how do we lift up those Indigenous-led solutions. So Chimigwich for this opportunity, and look forward to seeing all of the potential submissions, collaborations in this Indigenous Peoples Partnering for Climate. Miigwech, and stay safe.
I will now pass the mic to Tiffany Rainville to explain project parameters. Okay. There we go.
Hello to everybody. My name is Tiffany Wanville, and I am a senior international development project advisor with the Environment and Climate Action Team. I have been working on this initiative for a long time, and I'm really excited to finally get started with this initiative. This morning, I wanted to share some information related to the required project parameters section of the call page. I think the page hasn't changed yet. The slide hasn't changed yet. Here we go. You must be able to answer yes to the following parameters. You must have an alignment which is aligned with the United Nations Declaration of the Right of Indigenous Peoples. This includes minimum standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of the indigenous peoples of the world. This is key in this call. In your concept note, you might demonstrate this by referring to particular articles in the declaration to demonstrate this alignment, this harmonization. Value. Under this call, we hope to select 1 to 3 large projects. Your request for funding must be at least $5 million and no more than $15 million. This is for the total length of the project, your initiative, and for all the signatories combined, if you have several signatories for this large project.
Duration, your overarching project will last for up to 60 months, so 5 years. And it must also align with Canada's feminist international assistance policy, and in particular with Action Area 4, which is environment and climate action. You can align with other areas, of course, inclusive growth, gender equality, in addition to Action Area 4. But given that the project must focus on climate change adaptation, the alignment with Action Area 4 must be clear. In terms of geographic alignment, we've had a couple questions on this. And through the sub-granting component for the partnership projects that Céline described, you must support Indigenous-led partnership projects that take place in one or more official development assistance eligible countries. So there's no prioritized region in this call, and it can be one or more countries. In terms of not for profit, there can be no generation of profit under this initiative. And your overarching project, as well as the subgranted partnership projects, will not generate profit directly or indirectly for you or any other implementing partner, implementing organization involved in this project. And you can refer to Section 15 of the Terms and Conditions of Global Affairs Canada's International Development Assistance Program. And that's online, and we can put a link in the chat in just a moment. Your application can be submitted in English or French or a combination of the two languages. In terms of cost share, on an exceptional basis, cost share is optional in this initiative. However, we do encourage organizations and any co-signatories to contribute to the overarching project costs, either in cash and or in kind. And you can find more information on what is eligible for cost share by looking at Global Affairs Canada's policy on cost sharing for grant and non-repayable contribution agreements. And we can put that in the chat as well. So that's it for me for now. Céline, over to you.
Thanks, Tiffany. Quick note, I'm hearing that if anyone is connected using the VPN, they should not connect via the VPN to have a better connection, in case anyone's having that issue. I will soon pass the mic to our team of specialists who will go into more detail on elements related to results-based management, environment, gender, and human rights. What I will do is pass the mic between the speakers, so you'll see me in between speakers, but I do ask that my colleagues present themselves before each of their respective presentations. And our first specialist is Matine Pana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matina. I'm a performance management advisor, and I'll be sharing some information on results-based management today with you. Global Affairs Canada uses results-based management as an adaptive management approach to its projects, programs, and policies, which focuses on achieving outcomes, monitoring progress, learning, adapting, and reporting on results. The concept note requests a results-based management approach to each section. So that's the problems, solutions, learning, adapting, and reporting on results. Results-based management focuses on a set of core principles. You will also notice my colleagues who will speak next will also note many of these core principles, such as focusing on results, evidence-based analysis, managing risk, and participatory approaches. For this reason, I want to draw your attention to a few of these principles over the next couple slides. The first one I want to draw your attention to is contribution and influence. Understanding that intermediate and ultimate outcomes are not within the sole control of a single organization or project, but that an organization, program, portfolio, or a project contributes to and influences the achievement of these outcomes, and these outcomes will have to be measured and assessed. The second point is monitoring and evaluation. Applicants have been asked to describe the monitoring, evaluation, and reporting systems that would be set up, respecting Indigenous knowledge systems, perspectives, and priorities. Monitoring and evaluating progress on outputs, but especially outcomes using both qualitative and quantitative approaches to inform project design, monitor progress, learn, and adjust as needed are important.
Matine,
yes.
I'm just going to stop. Can you slow down just a little bit for the interpreters?
Yes,
Thank you.
For sure, thank you. At Global Affairs Canada, to facilitate a focus on results, there is a results chain, which distinguishes between different types of outcomes, the ultimate, intermediate, and immediate outcome, and then outputs, which are products or services delivered by implementing organizations. Intermediate outcomes are medium-term outcomes typically achieved by the end of a project. They describe changes in behavior, practice, or performance among beneficiaries and intermediaries. Immediate outcomes describe changes in capacity that derive from their associated outputs. Changes happen to people, institutions, and systems. At the concept note stage, we will assess concept notes to ensure applicants have described how change will occur, what are the assumptions that underpin the changes, and the risks and corresponding mitigation strategies. While outputs are a product or service delivered stemming directly from project activities that will contribute to their associated immediate outcomes. My colleagues who are specialists will speak on to the how. We will also assess to see if the overarching project design is realistic and logical, and the result statements are clear. For more information on this, please visit the Call for Concept Notes stage and the RBM How to Guide available on our website. There is an expectation of alignment between expected outcomes of your proposed concept to the climate finance program logic model at the intermediate and as well as the immediate levels. Taking a closer look at the climate finance program logic model, outcomes are broad and capture a variety of potential changes within the nature-based solution results pillar, which is the scope of this call. An example of alignment at the ultimate outcome level is provided. Note how there is a need for greater precision in this type of change and who is expected to experience the change for this call. The expected intermediate and immediate outcomes in the concept notes should reflect the challenges, the context of the proposed solution, and the climate adaptation issues the project design is targeting.
Thank you very much, Matinee. I'm going to now pass the mic to Sheila Reardon.
Good morning, and thank you, Celine and Matinee. Good morning, everybody. Hi, my name is Sheila Reardon, and I am one of the department's advisors on environment and climate change. What I am going to walk you through in the next few slides is the expectations that we have to meet the climate finance commitments related to the climate change and nature-based solutions components. Graham's video gave some really useful context on what Indigenous led solutions could look like, and I'll just complement that with what the expectations are in the climate finance parameters. These points that I'm going to discuss are all things that will be assessed in your concept notes, and I'm pointing these elements out particularly because they're the most common gaps that we've seen so far in the proposals that we've received related to climate finance in this area. The first one, in your rationale, these are really important points to ensure that they're embedded in the rationale and the design of your project. The first and foremost is demonstrating that climate change adaptation is the principal driver of your project concept. In other words, the project would not be undertaken otherwise. This is really a go, no go requirement since it is the basis of Canada's climate finance. And the second point here is the adaptation challenges that your project focuses on that are faced by Indigenous peoples need to be a direct result of climate change. So it is climate change adaptation. And the third point here, whoops, we've just lost the slide, I think. That will come back. I think I'm not the only one who's not seeing the slide.
No, I think Tiffany will bring it back.
Okay, perfect. I'll just speak to the third point, and then we can go on to the next slide after that. The third point is with the focus on nature-based solutions and aligning with the nature-based solutions and biodiversity component of climate finance. The nature-based solutions that you include in your concept are again to be responding directly to climate change adaptation challenges as opposed to other challenges. And these are the expectations that we expect to see as embedded and driving the proposal. While she's waiting for that, shall I continue on with the other talking points, and we can come to that in a few minutes in terms of the visual?
Yes, please. We're working on getting the deck back.
Perfect, thank you. So the next slide, when it comes, is really focusing on the next element of the concept note, which is on solutions. When you're considering solutions, it's especially important to demonstrate that your project is both evidence-based and nature positive. In terms of evidence-based, and the slide has some points on this, so you'll see these when it comes up, and later when it's shared. We include elements in the slide such as Indigenous knowledge and perspectives, climate science, climate vulnerability assessments as evidence-based approaches. In particular, I encourage you to consider not only the changes that communities are already experiencing from climate change, but also the projected climate change forecasts. These are based on the latest climate science, typically, which can be found, for example, in the scientists' reports of the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And as you'll see in a later slide, it's also important to ensure, of course, these are aligned with the Indigenous communities' adaptation priorities. And also, we like to see alignment with the host countries' adaptation priorities. We also strongly encourage you at some point to undertake climate vulnerability assessments within the communities to validate and confirm through a participatory approach the greatest vulnerabilities to climate change, and these can be embedded in your project. And of course, a concept note can only do so much, so I'm putting out ideas that will also be useful to inform the overall design of your project. The second point on the slide on solutions, the second slide, Tiffany, when you get to it, slide 15, is to demonstrate that the proposed solutions are nature positive. This is a relatively new term globally. It's still being discussed what elements it includes. If you are invited to submit a full proposal, more guidance will be given on that. The main things that we ask you to look for are to ensure that overall the concept is environmentally sustainable, that you build in, certainly consider Indigenous perspectives on what this means, that you build in environmental co-benefits where possible, for example, biodiversity conservation. And in fact, globally, when we speak of nature-based solutions, biodiversity conservation is a component of that, and I expect it would likely factor in implicitly in a lot of what will be proposed through your concept notes. Finally, we ask that you consider and avoid any unintentional environmental harm. We never intend to cause environmental harm, but we do sometimes see maladaptive climate adaptation approaches. For example, restoring ecosystems with an inappropriate species, perhaps reforesting with a succulent that takes more water rather than restoring groundwater, or introducing infrastructure or solutions that aren't adapted to the long-range forecast for climate change in that region and end up actually being maladaptive when we look at increasing severity of storms or sea level rise, flooding or water shortages, for example. I'm going to continue with these, and you will see the slides after. There we go. So on, just looking at where we're at. Yes, thank you. Slide 16. And now I need to catch up with these, I'm sorry. Yes, so in terms of your solutions, as I mentioned, there are certain alignments we look for, certainly with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Also best international practice, for example, aligned with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's global standard on nature-based solutions. Certainly with the host governments, climate commitments. These are often found in their nationally determined contributions and their national action plans that are submitted to the UNFCCC. And also, depending on the types of activities that you're thinking of proposing, just ensuring full alignment with all of the government's environmental requirements. And the last point I'm going to speak to before we get to the experience section of your proposals is just meeting Canada's climate change adaptation policy marker coding requirements. All proposals to be successful need to meet the requirements for what we call a CCA2, which is climate change adaptation being the principal purpose of your project. For that, the rationale and design need to clearly demonstrate that climate adaptation is the focus of the project, and the results framework needs to have at least 2 climate change adaptation focused intermediate outcomes, which Matinee will speak to more later, with corresponding measurable indicators. Next slide, please. This is just a quick recap. You can refer more to it later, and it will be discussed later on what is a CC2, as we call it, versus a 1. CC2 is principle. That is the focus of the project, and it's well demonstrated through the results in at least 2 intermediate outcomes. CCA1 is something we often see in concept notes we've received, where climate change adaptation is a significant part of the proposal, but it's not the principal part. To be successful for this funding, it really does need to be a CCA2. And the final slide is just quickly what we expect to see in terms of experience. We realize there are many, many things to be included in a very short space in your concept notes, but the types of things we would look for would be considering Indigenous perspectives on environmental sustainability and climate adaptation, considering if there are any gaps in the expertise that you or the partners that you will be partnering with have in terms of technical expertise related to environment and climate change, consider contracting that. Ensure that this expertise is carried through the subgranting mechanism so that the projects being supported through this, through your proposal, have the appropriate expertise advising them within your project. And finally, if you are considering proposing any infrastructure activities such as buildings or water infrastructure or solar infrastructure, these can require additional environmental assessment under Canada's Impact Assessment Act. And for those, just consider having the appropriate capacity to undertake those assessments. That ends my section. I'll pass it back to Céline. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sheila, and sorry for that technical issue. A couple of us who are each other's backups had a software update happening that was not anticipated. So thank you, everyone, for your patience.
The mic to Emmanuelle Trépanier. Thank you, and good morning to all. I am Emmanuelle Trépanier. I am a specialist in human rights and governance, and I am talking of this land here, and I will do my presentation in French, but as you see, you can see the content in English on the red side of the screen, and as you see, so today I will briefly talk to you about the recommended steps for applying required parameters and how we assess. For step 1, we ask you to explain the causes and the problem that are due to gender equality, etc. So the analysis, the equality results, gender will be achieved, and it would be advantageous for you to get familiar with all these criteria. I will talk to you about it very soon. When it comes to solution, the one that you will bring during your intervention, we will ask you to explain how the results when it comes to equality of genders come into play, and maybe we will have an idea of your strategy when it comes to that subject. And we also ask you to explain how this point of view of the women and girls, indigenous girls and women, are taken into account. You need to explain the process that will be used in those partnership projects. And we will also need explanation when it comes to the equality of gender. When it comes to the experience from your organization, when it comes to equality in gender, we will ask you to explain the results obtained when it comes to that subject, maybe results that you have from other similar projects and a project that imply, of course, indigenous people. And we will ask you to talk about organization, maybe experiences from women who lead different organizations. We are totally aware that the expected notion in this equality of gender is contextual and cultural, of course. So we invite you to explain in the context of your project or the indigenous community what is done and what is used as an expert, what kind of expertise you're using. We're still in that training moments. Next slide, please. Of course, in the same way, we have a system for the climate change, etc. We also have a system of coding for equality, for gender equality, and we will talk about it. But at this stage, it is very important to understand that the proposition will reach the level GE1, the partially integrated level, one or more of GE outcome at immediate level. So you see here in the square, in the red frame, what is needed. The other levels, we have, for example, GE3 targeted proposition will be a GE main objective, and all outcomes are GE. And then you have the intermediate level. And when it comes to the GE2, you can use the fully integrated results. But if you use the integrated result, it is important that the change made has to be clear and linked to proofs or to facts. And you need to note the indicators that you have used. Next slide. Of course, we are conscious. We are well aware that there are prerequisites that ask for the cooperation of between organizations for concept and good practice. We have a suite of tools in Canada which helps. You have 14 tools in that kit, and 5 of them are very, very are linked to this type of situation. At this conceptual phase, you can therefore use these tools, and the number 5, for example, talks about the gender equality outcomes. The number 7, the gender equality risk. And tool number 9 bring a little bit more context and nuances on the gender equality coding for initiatives. There are other tools that are very useful, especially on the gender equality expertise, the GBA plus, monitoring and evaluation. But now put the link that for these tools in the chat box, and then I will send the floor. I will pass the floor to my colleagues. Thank you, Emmanuel, and I'm going to give the floor to Amaya Renovales.
Hi, I don't know if you can see me. Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am Amaya. I'm the human rights specialist, human rights and governance. And I'm going to speak about the requirements or expectations from the human rights point of view. I also acknowledge that I'm speaking from the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people and city territory. And well, I will mention what you will see in the call that refers to human rights, and in the slideshow, you will see the expectations refer to what it is mentioned in the call. So, in terms of the rationale of the overarching project, you will see that it says that you're expected to identify and analyze the human rights to be targeted and the capacity gaps for their achievement. And it also asks to indicate how the proposed initiative aligns with the Official Development Assistance Accountability Act, but also with the Partnering for Climate Initiative and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And you have the links to those documents in there. And it also asks to cite sources for statistics or other evidence to be provided. What is this referred to is that, first of all, and because we're talking about human rights, and I will explain in the next slide the logic of the human rights based approach or the human rights structure. But what we're expecting to see here, it's a brief situation analysis of the human rights situation, and more specifically, which are the human rights that are being targeted to be addressed by your proposal. As you know, human rights are all interconnected. Everybody has human rights, but your proposal or your concept note, your projects are going to target more specifically or impact more specifically some human rights. For example, and because we're talking about the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, like the right to preserve indigenous culture and costumes, or the right to have the right to a healthy environment, or the right to health, or the right to a standard of living, because it's not only the rights that are recognized in this UN declaration, but also, and as you know, the UN declaration itself says that all human rights pertain to indigenous peoples as well. So you have to identify which are the rights specifically that your proposal will be targeting or affecting, impacting more directly. And more than that, what's the situation? Why are you targeting those rights? What's the situation? What is happening? What are the challenges in those communities that you're targeting, that the challenges to achieve the fulfillment of the enjoyment of those rights? Those rights, where are they recognized? Like, you have to identify also these international conventions or treaties or declarations. Wherever you see that those rights are included, mention it. And this is important for the reasons I'm going to explain just in the next slide. But another thing that you need to do is it should be evidence-based. So it's not just that we say that these rights, and we all know that these rights are being undermined, or that these rights need to be worked on in order to be achieved. But we have to show the evidence, like where, if you find reports or UN treaties recommendations any evidence you find on those human rights, on what is happening, on the situation, should be mentioned or included. And not only that, but also the voice and the voices of the affected community itself. So that might not be in public reports, but you might find it through direct consultation with the population. And if we go to the next slide, please. What I was mentioning about the treaties, I said it is important because when we are talking about human rights, and human rights are recognized in a written document, like such a treaty or a declaration, we're then talking about somebody holding rights, which is everybody. All human beings have human rights. But again, we need to identify who are those right holders that we are targeting with our overarching project. And but there is another party, which is the duty bearer, and the duty bearer is the ones, the authorities, and who have the obligation not only to respect and protect, but also to fulfill those human rights. So it is public authorities, public institutions, and in the case of indigenous peoples, is whoever that is seen as the authority with this responsibility. So or with this duty. So. And then there is another group, so it's three groups: the right holders, the duty bearers, and the responsibility holders, which are the ones who do not have, they are not the authorities, they don't have the obligation by law to fulfill their rights, but they do have a lot to do with those human rights and a lot to influence on positive or negative outcomes on those human rights. So when we talk about this terminology, it's not that we want you to use it. What we want is to identify who belongs to these three groups and to have a clarity on what are the responsibilities or the role of each group. So we need to identify, okay, which right holders are we targeting? Is it the people of this particular community in this geographical area, but also is it women, is it children, who are we targeting, are we addressing, and who are the duty bearers? Okay, we have these institutions or these authorities, these are the ones that we're going to work with, and who are the responsibility holders? Is it the women's organizations, indigenous groups organizations, or not formal organizations, but groups? Those are the responsibility holders that we will be working with and targeting. So if we go to the next slide, please, you will see that in the solution part of the call, it asks to identify who are the right holders. Sorry, give me 1 second. So in the part of the solution, they ask you to identify who are the potential direct and indirect beneficiaries, to describe your approach to considering the indigenous perspective, priorities, and upholding self-determination regarding climate change adaptation, the environment, and sustainability, and to explain how your overarching project will integrate and contribute to the fulfillment of indigenous rights. The solution part also asks you to explain how your overarching project will incorporate the views of indigenous peoples, particularly indigenous women and girls, and to describe any planned capacity and partnership building, support, collaboration, or knowledge sharing opportunities between indigenous peoples in Canada and developing countries, including through indigenous platform networks and alliances. So what it is expected here, first to identify the three groups that I mentioned before, and then it is very important within the right holders to identify who are the most vulnerable, the ones that are most poor, most marginalized. And why? Because it's not enough to say, okay, I'm going to work on this community. There will be people in that community that will face special challenges or additional challenges to achieve human rights. And if we don't address them, if we don't identify and address them and implement measures to reach them, they will probably be left behind. And to put an example, people with disabilities, if we implement a project with communication strategies, but we don't take into account that there are people with disabilities who might not get those messages, well, we will be leaving them out of the benefits of the project. So we need to mention who they are, who those are the people that are most vulnerable, and what are the measures we will be implementing to be able to make sure that they will be integrated in the benefits of the project, and that they will be effective participants of our project. And very importantly, and it has been mentioned before by my previous colleagues, we need to integrate indigenous voices and indigenous participation in throughout the whole stages of the proposal. So it has to be, they have to be consulted, their voice has to be taken into account for the design of the project, during the implementation, for the monitoring on how things are going, we need to make changes, and in the evaluation. So it's not only about consulting, it's also integrating them in the governance structures of the project to make sure that they are participating continuously and that we can reflect their voice and their opinion and their leadership and management within the project. And not and especially for the most vulnerable and marginalized, as mentioned, to make sure that they are fully included in the project. If we go to the next slide, please. And so just to end up, to wrap up, something like the idea here is to define your strategy. So once you have identified the analysis of the situation, what's the problem, what's the human rights that we're targeting, what's the situation, and what are the challenges and capacity gaps in each of the three groups that mentioned, in each of the, what is happening in the authorities that they cannot fulfill human rights? What is happening with the right holders? Is that they lack information? Is that they should be provided with these tools or with training, or what is it that we can do to fulfill those capacity gaps or to enforce their capacity? How can we build, or that they can build their capacity together through networking with other organizations or through promoting these partnerships? So we identify what is missing and how our projects are going to support the fulfillment of those gaps, or the of overcoming those challenges. And what is our plan? What is our strategy to do that? Because we are in the stage of a concept note, not a full proposal. We need at least to see what is our plan, what is what we're planning to do, expecting to fulfill those gaps. And the activities, as mentioned, as it's also mentioned in the call, should strengthen those networking and those capacity building and mutual support opportunities among groups. And they must always ensure the participation and inclusion of the most vulnerable. That's a very important aspect of the human rights-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaya. And I will now turn to Matine Pana again. And a reminder to speak slowly, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you see me? Because I can't see myself.
No, but we can hear your great voice.
Okay. You're not able to see me. Okay. So I apologize for that. I don't know why my camera. Oh, it's on now. Sorry about that. Okay. Thank you. So now that you've heard from all the specialists, let's bring this all together. And so partnering for climate is a unique program for us. It combines both climate change adaptation principles, or CCA2, like my colleague speak up on, with GE1, 2, or 3. But now you might be wondering, okay, how can you get both CCA2 and GE? For this, we suggest the use of what we call integrated intermediate outcomes. These allow for more than one change to coexist at the same time among the actors. But it's important to keep in mind that the changes are to be informed by needs. They have to be logically supported by immediate outcomes as well as outputs, and they should be monitored throughout the project's life cycle. Next slide, please. To assist in really demystifying what integrated outcomes could look like, we provided a few examples for you. So keeping in mind that the requirements outlined by my colleagues, these examples are imperfect as standalone outcomes because they are taken out of context here, out of the context that's really necessary for analysis of the problem and for the proposed solution and ultimately the project's design. With this, I will highlight one outcome per statement, and we can look at this a little bit more. Sorry about that. In the first example, the CCA outcome is, as you can see, increased conservation of climate vulnerable tropical forests by Indigenous communities. And then in the second example, the GE outcome is improved participation in decision-making by Indigenous women, which speaks to women's agency. In the third outcome, the CCA outcome is improved mangrove and seagrass protection and restoration. Keep in mind that if your proposal is successful, you will be required to ensure that each of the integrated outcomes you've identified are measured. For example, in this case, both identified CCA as well as the GE results would need to be measured for this to achieve the required coding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matinee. And now I am going to pass the mic to Stéphane Paquette, who will talk about about the practical aspects of preparing to submit an application.
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you, Céline. My name is Stéphane Paquette. I am here to present some practical aspect, and I'm going to make my presentation in French. So, let's go to the first slide. Today, we are going to talk briefly of three different steps that you should follow, the parameters, and how we do an evaluation of the conceptual notes. Next slide. So in order to be here, so we recommend that you go through those different steps as you go through the conception of the project, the design of the project. So make sure that you respect this. You consult the call page frequently throughout the design of your project, and it is very important to go back to that page in order to follow and align the eligibility requirements and project parameters. And you have the section how to present a proposal. So you have very important information there as far as the conceptual note. In this guide, you will find the directive, the general directives that are specific up to the limit of pages, the font, and the format. You have to include graphics as well as photo. It's 10 pages in French or 8 pages in English. We will not accept a proposition that will be beyond those numbers of pages. Okay, third step. What are the other available resources? Global Affairs Canada, we strongly encourage you to consult the resources shared on the call page for guidance. Fourth step, you want to consult the page with the Q&A section. The answer to questions we receive are posted on the Q&A webpage for this call. And we strongly encourage you to review the Q&A webpage frequently as it is regularly updated. Applicants who submit questions will not receive emails with responses to their question. Instead, answers will only appear on the Q&A page for this call and will be posted online before the call closes. We can only respond to questions received by January 11, 2023, and cannot respond to questions on specific organizational circumstances or specific project concept notes. This is to ensure that all applicants have access to the same information at the same time. Please note that Global Affairs Canada may redraft questions from applicants in order to protect their identities, as well to ensure that the questions and answers are broadly applicable to all applicants. Each question will have the publication date next to it, so it is easy to find. If you have questions about this call, please send them to indigenous autochtone at international.gc.ca before January 11, 2023 at noon. The fifth step is register in the Partner at International portal. You must submit your application package through the Partners at International portal. If your organization is not registered in the Partners at International portal, you need to do so before submitting your application package. Oh, sorry, here we go. Okay, it's back now. Sorry about that. Please review the registration information checklist webpage and how to register your organizations before beginning the registration process. The checklist will provide you with the information you need to complete registration, including the documents required to complete your registration. Registration must be completed in full during one session. It will take approximately 20 to 30 minutes to complete your registration. Start early to register your organization, as it can take to 10 business days to register. If you encounter technical difficulties while registering or when you're trying to submit a concept note, send an email to partner at international.gc.ca. Okay, here is a screenshot of the page. You can see that there's an arrow at the beginning, at the bottom of the page that shows you in English and in French. And this is where you need to click. Let's go to the next slide. So you have this screenshot here that shows you here how you need to give your consent when it comes to terms and conditions. On the left and then on the right, you follow the arrows, and then you have the questions that are here. So if you fill out the information when it comes to your organization, so if you enter less information regarding the profile of your organization, you please note that the number of the organization is given by the agency from Canada. It is a number that is given by the Canadian government. Then another screenshot here. You can see here, so you have different options. And you can see for request for funding, and you will see that you have here a specific icon for the indigenous population, and on the right you have apply or appliquer in French, and you click here, and that will take you to the last page here, which is a questionnaire that you will need to fill out. So that's it. So and just to show you the parameters that you need to respect. And then you have the eligibility to make sure that you correspond to all the parameters that are required. Okay, so to define the project goal within the presentation, you have them here as a reference for you. So you must examine very carefully of this appel and all their parameters to make sure they have a correspondence to your project. You have to be able to say yes to all the parameters on the page of the call in order for your application to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, it will not be evaluated. Be very careful because for each call we have certain parameters and sometimes that are not properly filled out, and you want to include things that are not eligible for this, and this will your application will be automatically rejected. Then next slides, you have the next required project parameters. So you have make sure that you have all those documents, and you must go within the date that will expire, with the expiration date. You have the different steps that you have here with the different organization, and you have different letters of support from indigenous organization. On Annex 3, you have two separate financial statements for the most recent fiscal years for each signatory. On Annex 4, applicable to indigenous organization, supporting documentation regarding the history, governance structure, and or the ownership of the indigenous organization. We will not accept any late submissions. Please read the portal instructions carefully and plan to submit your application at least 3 business days in advance of the call deadline to ensure that technical difficulties do not prevent you from submitting your concept note before February 8, 2023 at noon Eastern Time. Next slide. How do we evaluate your concept note? So this call is part of the process in 2 steps. The first is a concept note, and the second one is a full proposal step. Once you have the closing on February 8, 2023, we are going to be evaluating the concept note. After that, we will ask you more information when it comes to what you want to do, and the ideas must be must shown the motivation and why you would want to do that. I just lost. Sorry about that. My computer is trying to do an update right now as well. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. So just to let you know that I might go a little slower. So the partnerships, the partners must get together, and the 3 different projects can be selected, and we would have different concept notes that will be evaluated. We also have how we assess your concept note, as we already talked about. Can we go to the next slide, please? So, are you still there? Yes, maybe you can continue because we might have another technical issue coming up. Okay, so just to recall, to remind you, yeah, I'm very sorry. I have some technical issue with an update from my computer. I just lost my presentation here. I'm so sorry. Let me go back as much as I can. It won't take long. Give me just a minute. Yes, Stefan, maybe we could let Tiffany talk so you can try to find your presentation again. I was just trying to go to slide number 43. Tiffany, go ahead. It's slide 43. I'm so sorry. Okay.
So continuing with slide 43. Okay, a reminder that the assessment of your concept note is based solely on what's written in your submitted documents. We can't consider other sources of information, your website, or make assumptions on your behalf. And this is a matter of fairness to all applicants. So even if you've done projects before with Global Affairs, the information that you want to share with us about this call, please include it in the concept note and proposal. And please keep this in mind while preparing your concept notes and full proposals. If your organization is submitting a concept note in partnership with other organizations that would sign the financial instrument with Global Affairs, i.e., co-signatories, each of these co-signatories must meet the requirements listed on the webpage and provide proper documentation about it. One of the organizations must be determined as a lead signatory, and that's the organization that submits the documents into the portal on behalf of all of the co-signatories. At the full proposal stage, Global Affairs will conduct a financial risk assessment and financial viability analysis on projects and organizations. And in the case of multiple signatories, the assessment is going to be done on the lead signatory. If multiple signatories submit the concept note, the experience and technical capacity, however, is judged based on the group of co-signatories. So it's assessed collectively for all signatory organizations, but financial capacity will only be assessed based on the lead signatory. Concept notes that are screened in will undergo a merit assessment when we get them based on the following criteria: the rationale for the overarching project, the proposed solution, and the organization experience. So the elements of each of these criteria are listed here. It's the elements that are exactly on our website and just sort of copied in to remind you of them. But we'll go one by one, just like what we said on the call page. We'll go one by one to see if all of those things have been met. So we suggest that you transform that list into questions and review your concept note with those questions in mind. So here are some of the examples of what we'd be looking for, and you'll find all that on the call page. So this concludes our part of the presentation. Thanks over to you, Céline, and for a much deserved break for everyone.
Thanks so much, Tiffany, for stepping in there. So we are going to have a health break, but before we do that, I wanted to let people know that we're going to put up the survey that you will be able to find. Oh, there it is. To let us know which region you're interested in doing programming in, and it can be more than one. But for now, if you can pick one region, that will help us organize the breakout rooms and see. If many people are interested in one particular region, that group might be bigger, or we might have two rooms for the same region. So that'll help us get organized. So if you could vote on the poll there, that would be wonderful. And then we had said we would take a 5-minute break. We've been going for a little bit longer than we thought when we would plan that 5-minute break. So what I would suggest is that we do a 10-minute break and we come back for the question and answers, which will be followed then by the networking breakout sessions.
So we shall be back at 11:37. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Hello, everyone. I hope you had a good break. Welcome to the question and answers session of today's webinar. Today, we will provide answers to some of the questions that we received since the launch of the call that we received on the via the email address that we have listed on the call page. We have shared that email address in the chat already. Please note that Global Affairs Canada may have redrafted questions from applicants in order to protect their identities and to ensure that the questions and answers are broadly applicable to all participants. Questions and answers will be posted on our webpage. In addition to the ones that we are not able to answer today. If you have questions today, please write them in the chat. Thank you for those of you who have already started adding your questions in the chat. You will have seen in the call page the importance we give to partnerships. This is why we have proposed the networking session in the last part of the webinar. If you are interested in knowing and being known by other participants in order to facilitate collaboration and potential partnerships, please stay on the line after the Q&A session. I see in the chat that people are already communicating with each other, which is great. Organizations that do not wish to participate in the networking portion are welcome to exit after the Q&A. I will now turn the mic over to Tiffany Rainville to kick off the response part of the Q&A.
Hello again, everyone. I've been told that Janine is on with us. She's our financial expert and guru. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Janine, if you are well connected. And you can start us off with some of the questions we've already received via email from folks. À toi.
Hi, Tiffany, and hello, everyone online. Good morning, maybe good afternoon, depending on where you are, and happy Friday. So I will be covering the financial questions that were received in advance. Thank you very much for submitting them. So the first question is, do we need to submit a budget? At the concept note stage, there is no requirement to submit a budget. Only the total value of the initiative is required, reflecting the amount of funding requested, as well as the proposed cost share, if applicable. A project budget will only be requested and assessed if you are invited to submit a full proposal. Organizations that are invited to submit a full proposal will be asked to provide a budget table with costed details. While exact costing is not expected when the full proposal is submitted, recognizing that budgets do adjust over time, it is expected that the first version of the detailed budget provided to Global Affairs Canada will provide solid financial information, and that if the project is approved for funding, there will be only limited adjustments made to that budget. To find out more about eligible costs, please consult the website on guidance on eligible costs for development initiatives, for which the link will momentarily be added to in the chat. To be eligible for reimbursement, project costs must be reasonable, pertinent, they must comply with Global Affairs directives and policies, and they must be directly and clearly related to the project. The second question we received is in regards to overhead compensation. If there are multiple signatories, how is the 12% overhead to be shared? Overhead compensation is a fixed compensation rate of 12% applicable to Global Affairs Canada's contribution of direct eligible project costs. In the event of multiple signatories, The overhead compensation will be provided to the primary signatory of the financial instrument. That is to say, the lead organization that submits the proposal. A portion of the overhead compensation could be transferred to the other signatories at the lead signatory's discretion. It is important to note that at no time can overhead compensation exceed 12%. Next question received. Does Global Affairs Canada reimburse the costs incurred for the preparation and submission of an application for the overarching projects? No. The answer is no. Global Affairs Canada does not fund the development or submission of full applications or proposals. Next, what are the expenses that can be made within the 65% dedicated to subgranting and the remaining 35%? Again, all expenses must be eligible as per Global Affairs Canada's guidance on eligible costs for development initiatives. Overarching projects must disperse at least 65% of the project funding to Indigenous-led partnership projects led by Indigenous organizations in Canada with Indigenous organizations in developing countries. These partnership projects must aim to achieve development results in ODA-eligible countries. Under this call, the objective is to improve the climate resilience of Indigenous peoples in developing countries. The remaining 35% can be spent by the signatory or co-signatories on eligible costs related to the overarching project's management, governance, reporting, capacity building, monitoring, evaluation, research, and learning. And that concludes the questions with a financial aspect that were received in advance of today's call. Thank you.
Great. Moving on, I don't seem to be on the screen. Can you see me and hear me? Yeah, okay, great. So another question that we had was, can a non-Indigenous organization in Canada with strong connections with Indigenous peoples abroad in ODA eligible countries, but no working relationship with Indigenous peoples in Canada, can they apply? And the answer is no. At this point, the non-Indigenous organizations must demonstrate strong connections with Indigenous organizations in Canada and experience working with First Nations, Inuit, and or Métis. Non-Indigenous organizations have to show these strong connections through the letter of support. And strong connections can be close relationships, common interests, partnerships, and or collaborative work. However, a non-Indigenous organization could theoretically make connections with interested Indigenous organizations and or First Nation, Inuit, and or Métis, while the call for concept notes is open until February 8th, and submit a concept note with these new partners. Organizations may also make note of their connections with Indigenous peoples in ODA eligible countries in their application, but this is only if applicable, and it's in addition to the letter of support that they must submit from Indigenous peoples in Canada. So through subgranting, the selected overarching projects will support partnership projects that are co-led by Indigenous organizations in Canada and abroad. Non-Indigenous organizations here at the partnership project level, they can participate, but that's at the invitation or initiative of Indigenous organizations in Canada, because these partnership projects are really meant for Indigenous organizations in Canada partnering with Indigenous organizations abroad. So a non-Indigenous organization may have a role, but that really depends on the partnerships that are created for each concept note. Another question, if I have experience working with Indigenous organizations in Canada or abroad, should I put them as non-signatory partners in the concept note? So this is important. So if the organizations with whom you have past experience are interested in eventually applying for a partnership project, they should not be involved in the design of the concept note for these overarching projects with this, which is this particular call. That ensures that they've got no unfair advantage. It reduces any potential apparent or real conflict of interest. So, any signatories or even non signatory organizations that are on your concept note that are listed there, they'll be unable to access funding through partnership projects. Um, the overarching projects should explain how they'll manage conflict of interest, including through conflict of interest agreements, perhaps. If organizations with whom they have a previous working relationship will eventually apply for partnership projects through subgranting. So just a bit of an explanation on how that will be managed and how the relationship and information is shared. Um, and or projects, overarching projects will also need to clarify the role of any Indigenous person or organization in the selection of the partnership projects down the road. Okay, so another question is if external representatives of the Assembly of First Nations, Inuit Circumpolar Council Canada, and Métis National Council have participated in the design of this call, which they have, how will potential apparent or real conflict of interest be avoided given their relationship with Indigenous organizations who might apply? Um, we wanted to just make note that for global affairs, the commitment to reconciliation is in part through its action plan on reconciliation. And it includes a goal that's particular to expanding and deepening partnerships with Indigenous peoples in Canada and around the world to enhance participation and respond to their identified priorities. And so given the nature of this call, as my colleagues have has mentioned, it was really fundamental for Indigenous peoples to be part of this initiative from the beginning, from the design stage. And so to deal with the fact, that's a bit of a different way of doing calls for us. And so to manage some of the conflict of interest questions that might arise or did arise, um, the three organizations that participated in the working group are signing a contract with Global Affairs for their advisory services. And in that, there's a clause on conflict of interest, and then there's also an annex on for a non-disclosure agreement, and that's pertaining specifically to the representatives in the working group that will continue to work with us for the next year on this call. So this ensures that these national Indigenous organizations won't submit a proposal for these overarching projects because they're involved in the design. Um, but the non-disclosure agreement just specifies that it's actually the individuals that are on the working group that aren't allowed to share information with organizations who might apply. Um, okay, so yeah, the non-disclosure agreement just states to the representatives can't provide any assistance to organizations applying under the call, but their organizations, the Assembly of First Nation or ICC Canada or MNC, can provide their usual services and support to their member organizations um, as they always do, but just the people working on the working group can't provide that support. So hopefully that's clear as mud. Okay, moving on. Can the Assembly of First Nation, Inuit, Tapiriit, Kanatami, or Métis National Council be considered co-signatories or non-signatory partners in the concept note? And it's similar to a question above, but the answer here particularly is no again, just because representatives from these organizations participated in the design of the call and they'll be involved in the assessment of the concept notes and full proposals. So they can't be listed as co signatories or non signatory partners. But those organizations are eligible to apply for partnership projects down the road if they so choose. Okay, what is expected of climate action partnership projects? We expect partnership projects to be co designed and co implemented by Indigenous organizations in Canada alongside Indigenous organizations in developing countries. So, the aim of these partnership projects is to address climate action priorities of Indigenous peoples in developing countries. the development activities must take place in ODA eligible countries. And these partnership projects might be more similar to what is commonly funded by Global Affairs Canada, but the explicit intent here is for Indigenous organizations in Canada to be funding recipients. And we got a question in the chat about how can work be done in North America. And given that Global Affairs Canada's mandate is really work that takes place abroad and support um, in ODA eligible countries, the activities and a lot of the spending can't happen for activities in Canada. It has to be focused on the priorities of Indigenous peoples abroad and taking place in developing countries abroad. Okay. Are Indigenous businesses eligible? Indigenous businesses are eligible as long as they meet the organization eligibility criteria and required project parameters. So, um, again, just noting that the overarching projects and sub-granted partnership projects can't generate profit, as we mentioned earlier. And in a moment, I can put those relevant links in the chat um, if you want to just take a look. Just a couple more, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague, and then we'll go to the questions we're getting in the chat. So, what is considered an Indigenous organization? Um, For this call, Indigenous organizations are Indigenous led organizations that demonstrate support for Indigenous communities. Indigenous organizations that apply for funding here must provide the supporting documentation regarding their history, governance structure, and/or ownership. Um, and considering the diversity of Indigenous peoples, an official definition of Indigenous hasn't been adopted by any UN body system. So at Global Affairs as well, we're sort of taking a broader look. We're following what's recommended in the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, um, and understanding that there might be other terms in a developing country context for what constitutes Indigenous peoples. So there's a wide recognition of that. And then in Canada, Indigenous peoples, in our understanding, is just the three distinct peoples: First Nation, Inuit, and Métis, with unique histories, languages, cultural practices, and spiritual beliefs. So that's a bit of a definition or a bit of a response here, and we can put a little bit more details in the Q&A printed version, including sources for this, or call page version, I mean. Okay, final question. How does the call envision the balance between direction and control, the regulation piece of the project which subgrants to Indigenous partners, and then on the other hand, the leadership and decision-making power of Indigenous partners in the project implementation? And yeah, I mean, we understand that that's a bit of a tricky balance, and we hope that in the concept notes and proposals, the organizations can make decisions about how the governance will work, how the partnership projects are managed and monitored in a way that prioritizes Indigenous leadership and decision-making power. And so organizations will need to consider and describe how the subgranting partnership projects will be managed, including eligibility criteria, selection mechanisms, et cetera, and just describe a little bit sort of how they're going to balance that, how they're grappling with it. Um, Yes. Okay, so that's it for me. Martina, if you could jump on, there's a few questions related to results-based management that have your name on them.
Thank you, Tiffany. So we've received 3 questions regarding results-based management in advance. The first question we received is, can we have intermediate outcomes relating to climate governance, climate smart agriculture and food systems, clean energy transition and coal phase out, or must the whole logic model link to nature-based solutions and biodiversity? So to answer that question, your proposed overarching project and the sub-granted partnership projects must align with Canada's International Climate Finance Program logic model at all levels of outcomes related to nature-based solutions and biodiversity. So again, that's results pillar 1400. intermediate outcomes relating to other intermediate outcome categories, such as 1100 climate governance, 1200 smart agriculture and food system, or 1300 clean energy transition and coal phase out are not permitted. The second question we received is, do you want the logic model and performance measurement framework to align exactly with Canada's International Climate Finance Program logic model? Or is there some room for flexibility there? So to answer that question, your proposed overarching project must align with Canada's International Climate Finance Program logic model at all levels of outcomes related to nature-based solutions and biodiversity. Again, that's result pillar 1400. And it must aim to achieve the following ultimate outcomes: improved climate resilience of Indigenous peoples in developing countries. It is important that projects develop expected outcomes that reflect the reality, so the context and the needs of people in developing countries, which means this is not just simply a copy-paste exercise. There is flexibility related to who experiences a change, what the change experienced is, and where the change takes place, related, of course, to nature-based solutions and biodiversity. Just to keep a note here is that in the Indigenous-led partnership projects, as part of subgranting component, will also have to support the climate adaptation priorities of Indigenous peoples in developing countries and align with the climate finance program logic model. And the last question is, can result statements contain more than one change, so related to nature-based solutions and gender? The results-based management for international systems programming at Global Affairs Canada, the how-to guide available on our website. On page 38, it provides guidance on how to articulate an outcome statement. Typically, an expected outcome is simple and it expresses only one change. However, because of the unique nature of our Partnering for Climate program, in which we ask for projects that use nature-based solutions to deliver climate change adaptation and biodiversity co-benefits and gender integration or transformation, we are open to receiving integrated intermediate outcome statements that include 2 or more changes. It is important to keep in mind that each dimension of the change needs to reflect analysis of consultations and research, so based on evidence, be logically supported at the immediate and output levels, as well as be monitored using performance indicators. Thank you, and I will pass it on to the next person.
Me again, friends. Just another response here. When providing examples of organizational experience, how far back are we able to go in choosing projects to profile? So specific details are given for some criteria only, such as technical and financial experience managing projects. So here we say a minimum value of 5 million and minimum of 5 years over the last 15. Um, so that can be cumulative years. It can be 2 years in one project and then 3 more again, but just in total, it has to be at least 5 years over the last 15 years. And in terms of the subgranting programs and the experience related to that, we say a minimum of 3 years over the last 15 years. And so if you've got some specific questions about experience, I encourage you to just take a quick look at the website. So, for example, if you look at subgranting, even just doing a quick word search, there's a couple places where we specifically tell you what we're looking for. So, if I look at the guide related to subgranting and what experience is required for the overarching project applicant, we say describe how the subgranting component will be managed and provide details of how the partners will be selected, supported, etc. So that's to kind of show that the overarching projects have thought through how they're going to do it. They have some of that experience, know the questions to ask. And then later on, we say under experience that you have to demonstrate the financial and technical experience of setting up these subgranting programs. And again, it's a minimum of 3 years of doing it over the last 15 years. And that's in total. It can be a project of 1 year, then another of 2 years, and so forth. So there we're also saying provide details on the funding envelope, the objective, duration, due diligence, and monitoring of grants, sort of how you did it to show that that experience is there. Um, so I think that's one question that was in the chat. I'll turn it over to Celine, who's our mastermind of managing all the questions coming in. Thanks so much for these.
Thanks, Tiffany. And Martine and Janine. I see one that I will take quickly. Could a non Canadian organization be the prime? So I'm interpreting that as could a non Canadian organization be the lead applicant? And the answer to that one is no. We have a question that I think our financial expert colleague would be able to answer if you are available. If Janine could be, if her mic could be um, turned on, if she's available. The question is there a share of the total budget that can or should be spent on activities in Canada that respond to climate change adaptation priorities of Indigenous communities? Oh, sorry.
Is this written?
Yeah, maybe. Did you get to that one earlier?
No.
You know what?
Can you repeat that question, Celine?
The
Thank you.
question is there a share of the total budget that can or should be spent on activities in Canada that respond to climate change adaptation priorities of Indigenous communities? It's similar to the North America question, perhaps.
I would almost defer to the call page to see what parameters are listed there. Above, like before anything, it's essential that all parameters in the call page, they must be respected, including financial and otherwise. Um, and so that's kind of my overarching guidance to that question.
Tiffany, do you want to jump in?
Sure. I think the benefits for Indigenous communities in Canada will be more indirect. It'll be through participation in broader events that include and target, um, focused work with Indigenous peoples abroad and the priorities abroad. But through participation or workshops and things like that, there'll be some of those indirect benefits for Indigenous communities in Canada. But the majority, like the activities, in order to be eligible, they must take place in ODA eligible countries.
Thank you, Tiffany. So there is a question that I think we might need to consult more additional colleagues on that I don't think we would provide the full answer today. And Tiffany, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's a question that says, how will Indigenous peoples in ODA countries be defined? Can they include communities who were directly impacted by colonization, i.e., displacement from their original lands, although they may not consider themselves Indigenous? Tiffany, you can let me know if you agree that I think we need to consult our colleagues on that response and provide it on the website.
Um, y- yes, I think in terms of giving a fulsome answer, that's right, Celine. I would just say a lot of what we're basing our definitions on is what's out of the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and they have a clear definition in some cases of how that can look in other countries. So I can share that link because that's certainly something that we're aligning with. But also understanding that self determination is a key component, and so I think we'll come back to you in terms of being clearer on our perspective on that. But also I encourage you to just take a look at the UN PFII and how they're defining and explaining some of that.
Thank you. We have three more questions, three or four more questions, and it's 12:08. We wanted to make sure that we will have time for the networking session as well. What I think I'll do is go through as many of these questions as possible, and then what we'll need to do is take the questions that we aren't able to answer today, and we'll make sure that they appear on our website. So this question now that we have, I think would be for Sheila. If Sheila's mic could be prepared so she can participate. Um, and if she could confirm that she's there, maybe if her camera could be turned on. Regarding improved climate resilience of Indigenous peoples in developing countries, what does climate resilience mean or look like? Are there specific metrics GAC is interested in?
That's a great question. I would need to also refer back to the parameters that are on the website. I would refer to those primarily. Climate resilience is very much related to climate adaptation. It's building the resilience to be able to cope and adapt to the changing climate. In terms of the specifics of that, it relates very much to the type of approach you want to take within your project. And I would refer for further guidance to the definitions on the P4C website and also in the overarching logic model and performance measurement framework examples under the nature-based solutions and biodiversity element of the climate finance. It's all about using nature-based solutions to adapt to the climate changes that are occurring and forecast and building stronger resilience in communities to those. I'm hoping that helps a little bit clarify it. Thank you.
Yeah, and can I just pipe in for a second? Our RBM specialist on the chat was saying, in the context of this project, resilience should be clearly defined by the applicant. So I think this is a situation for sure where we want the concept notes to show that the voices and the definition around resilience comes from Indigenous communities abroad.
Thank you, Tiffany. I think this is another one for Tiffany. It goes back to something that you said earlier. If a co-signatory is an Indigenous-led organization in Canada, are they not allowed to also be a part of the partnership projects?
Yeah, that's, I mean, we've had a lot of discussion about this, but the problem is just that if these organizations, if you're a co-signatory, then you're very aware of how partnership projects are selected because that's a big part of what you're proposing here. Um, and so there's unfair advantage in terms of the information that you have. Um, and so in this case, really the overarching projects are generally um, a lot of the management and the subgranting component for partnership projects. But the co-signatories at the overarching project stage generally wouldn't be involved at the partnership project stage in terms of implementing directly in the field. We can come back to that with more details, or if other colleagues want to add to that.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. And I think what we'll do is take one more question, and then we'll go to the networking session, so there's enough time for that. And this is maybe one for Sheila and or Sarah and or Matine. To align with the climate finance program logic model, do all intermediate outcomes need to align with the nature-based solutions and biodiversity outcome 1400? Or are other intermediate outcomes that contribute to GAC's provided ultimate outcome? And that's cut off, but I think basically the permissible. Thank you.
Sorry, my camera's not coming on. There. I can try and take a first stab at that one. We had asked, and I saw in our previous set of answers also, where we are aligning with that particular sub-element of the climate finance. So the overall project needs to be focused on that. To meet the requirements, recognizing there are many different parameters, we really need to see that, I guess, in one space, the entire project is focused on that in terms of within the logic model. At least 2 of the intermediate level outputs need to be focused on the climate change adaptation element. And then to build in the other components, for example, there could be one that's more focused on the gender equality and other governance issues related to that, would be my short answer. But the entire project, when you're scoping it and you're designing and when you're first reflecting on it, should be emphasizing that it's focused on that broader thematic area. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. And I think that we would take one last question, and then we will go to the next portion of the agenda. The question is, can the co-signatory organization with a Canadian organization share their overarching project responsibilities, M&E, project management, governance, capacity building, reporting, and subgranting? So do the co-signatories share responsibilities? Tiffany, is that one that you would want to take?
Sure. Yeah. The expectation is that it's shared. Exactly how that's broken down depends on the organizations. But given that both are signatories on the financial instrument, then everything that's in that contribution agreement is the responsibility of both. And then later on, there can be more details on who plays a little bit more of one role or another and how that's broken down to ensure Indigenous leadership. That would be my response for now.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Ensure that you go back into the main page. If you have any more question after the webinar, please send them to the email address that we put into the chat, which is indigenous-dev-autochtone before 12 noon on January 11, 2023. We will not respond to questions received after that time. We will not answer to specific conceptual note.
Session is to facilitate networking. No other questions will be answered during this portion of the meeting. If you're not interested in this next session, you may leave now. The remaining organization consents to be seen and or heard. during this session of today's webinar, please introduce yourself, your organization, and briefly summarize your region of interest and what you might be seeking through collaboration with any other organization. This is a bilingual session. You can express yourself in your language of choice. However, there is no simultaneous interpretation during this session. The GAC staff will be present to help translate if necessary.
Given that we will not come back to plenary, I wanted to take a moment to share closing remarks. I wanted to reiterate what an exciting opportunity is for us to work on a project that so intentionally seeks to align with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and supports our reconciliation efforts. This initiative will work hard to support and prioritize Indigenous leadership and self-determination, and we look forward to working with new Indigenous partners. Again, please review the Q&A page frequently and ensure the guiding parameters are central to your concept note design. A reminder that the recording from today's session will be available on the GAC YouTube channel as soon as possible. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to receiving your concept notes. You should see a message to click on the breakout room of your choice. And we will now move to the breakout session. So thank you, everyone, and see you either in the breakout session or good luck with your concept design process.
To clarify things, we're going to leave this window and we're going to go back to the base page where you were. And in the bottom, you will see different section. You'll have Asia, South America, etc. So if you want to change, you can just click and close the window and go back to the main page. You can then choose the session that you want to participate to.